Once again, welcome to this debate session that we have been hosting for the past almost a month. We named it after the month, December, because it happened on the 1st, on the 15th, and today on the 29th of December. This session had 3 parts, obviously, and it was staged by the chair of Architecture and Design too. The last debate on the 15th December, we had Ato Dawit Banti and Ato Brook Taklahimanot debating on pedagogy or the teaching of the architect. It was a very vibrant session where we saw a kind of the re-understanding or I would dare say, the redefinition of architecture in the 3 poles of construction, detailing, urban design, and the art as the 3 poles. It was quite a vibrant discussion. Today, on the 29th December, we have Ato Zallaq Balai and Ato Emmanuel Teshome. The subject of debate is a practice. Maybe it's not necessary to introduce them, but still we have to understand what they have done so far. So I will give a kind of brief profile of the personnel. To Zallaq Balai, I don't know if it is very visible, I will read it. He did his BSc in this campus in 1987. In 1992, he did his master's in architecture, M.Arch, in Helsinki University of Technology, Finland. Afterwards, he did workshops, small trainings with Glenn Murcutt, an Australian architect, masterclass in Australia in 2005. And then Sustainable Buildings and Integrated Design, South African Solar Academy in Johannesburg, 2002. And since 1987, he had been teaching in the Department of Architecture. By then it was named so, but now, of course, the EiABC under the Addis Ababa University. And then afterwards, from 1988 up to 95, he practiced at the studio of Michael Tedros, whom we regard as the first Ethiopian architect. Since 1995, he founded the Zallaq Balai Architects Private Limited Company. And afterwards, since 2008, he was a consultant architect, giving technical advisory to the African Union Conference and Office Complex project designed and constructed by the Chinese government. He is a co-publisher of a book, maybe in English it might be a guide for house builders, Addis Ababa in 1993, a construction guide book in Amharic targeted to self-help builders. He has been publications chairman of Association of Ethiopian Architects, AEA, and editor of AEA magazine and newsletter from 1997 up to 99. And from 2005 up to 2008, he served as the president of Association of Ethiopian Architects. Then we have Emmanuel Teshome. He also did his BSc in this campus by 1999. Afterwards, in 2001, he did a Masters of Architecture in Human Settlement from the Katholieke Universiteit Leuven, Belgium. In September 1999 up to October 2009, he has been operations advisor for the Genuine Laser Crafts Private Limited Company, laser projects manufacturing company. From September 1999, 2001, he was a part-time architect for Wasson Architects. June 2005 up to March 2003, he's been working with SNV Ethiopia, Netherlands Development Organization, private sector advisory consulting on commercial handicrafts design. September 2008 up to 2009, head of the Department of Architecture at Addis Ababa University, which is EiABC, obviously. since September 1999, working at the EiABC as with the establishment of the EiABC. July 2005 up to 2006, January, he is a senior architect and project manager at BET, or BET Consulting Architects PLC. January 2006 to December 2010, manager and senior partner at BET Consulting Architects PLC. September 2010 up to date, shareholder in the project management chair at the EiABC. January 2010 up to date, council chairman of EiABC. April 2010 to date, founder and CEO of Zacon Builders PLC. January 2011 to date, founder and senior partner architect in A+P Consultancy PLC. So now you understand why I selected these two people to discuss about practice. At the beginning, before I jump here, of course, I would like to invite you to the stage. You have set up chairs. At Zulika, we have shared this mic. The past two debates, we have been discussing a lot of things, which I think are can serve as a background for today's discussion. So I will start by asking them to give us a very short discourse of their thoughts in these dimensions of beauty, identity, and context. I will try to give an instigational verses and words here. In beauty, we talked about attribute versus inherent character, or purpose versus appearance. And concerning identity, we mentioned a lot of quotations, but here I took Charles Correa's words. Identity is a byproduct of looking at our real problems rather than self-consciously trying to find identity as an end in itself, without worrying about the issues we face. And then concerning context, we had the discussion of architecture being a representation of human culture, or architecture projecting or being a tool to create a new context or culture. I know it's quite a wide subject, but I would like to hear your personal opinions in this discussion. We should make it a bit precise so that we can give more time for the rest of the discussions. So with seniority, I guess.
So I thought you were talking about practice.
Yes, but as a background, we have a theory.
About beauty.
Context and identity.
Yeah. Okay, truly I was not expecting you were going to comment on this, but I will try to comment. Maybe first of all, I really would like to thank you for organizing this session. We were discussing with Emmanuel that I have been in this campus for many years, and we were probably, when we were staff members many years ago, the number of staff members at one time were about 10, and I was one of the 10 people. And I see now the number of staff, maybe more than the number of students of that time. So it really is a great thing to see this. And more important, now we see this kind of discussions being organized, and a lot of energy is coming out. So this is really a great thing to see. Beauty, I think. I think beauty is, for me, making things right. I would try to see it in terms of architecture, how we do it, we get beauty in architecture. I've been in this discussion, and I remember discussions, and some of the thoughts I was thinking at that time when they were discussing is how would we do it in architecture? How would we get beauty? In architecture, I would say we work in groups. We do lines, and then we get into a group, and we stop. We do lines, we take into a group. So sometimes geometry gives us to arrive into a beauty. Sometimes answering the right function, sometimes addressing the right site problem. So for me, beauty in architecture is more getting the right thing, being correct, being sustainable, and the like. I think I would see it at that level. As I said, I was not actually, even when you were showing this thing, beauty, I thought you were going to revise what was going on in the past. So if I have more thoughts as we speak, I will share, but that's how I think.
I think I would like to share the same thought with Zalaka that truly these occasions are very instrumental for the learning mind. In my experience, there have been years that I felt I was not learning anything by teaching here. By that I mean there wasn't a challenge, there wasn't discourse, there was no criticism. But lately, I'm seeing a lot of discussion going on. Even students these days are ask more questions, more intriguing questions. And I see there is a new blood of thought going in the campus, which helps us as instructors to learn and also to see inwards. And I would like to congratulate your chair for being part of this and organizing these debates. So it requires a lot of energy. We all know that, but I think it's quite an achievement, and I'm sure similar things will continue. I guess tomorrow we are also here for other discussions. So it's truly amazing that there is this kind of energy going on. On this topic of beauty and identity and culture, for me, beauty in architecture is something that makes me happy. Is something that makes me me. To enjoy a space, to enjoy a form. If we're talking about architecture, to enjoy the process, that is beauty for me. I cannot define or categorize what is beautiful and what is not, but if I enjoy the process of making architecture, it will become beautiful for me. And I would say it's the same for other thoughts as well. Music, art, people are beautiful when I'm comfortable with them. This is how I understand beauty in architecture. Unfortunately, I was not there in the debate, so I don't know if there was any opinion of this sort. But on the other topic of this line, I personally, honestly, don't have. I cannot stand on the left or the right of this sentence. As the case may be, architecture could be shaping culture, and culture may very importantly need to shape architecture as well. So it's difficult for me to side on this particular topic. Of course, I'm also a very young architect, so it's still a learning process. Maybe 15, 20, 30 years later, I would have an opinion on this with another December debate.
Thank you. Sorry for surprising you with this subject, but I found it interesting to have a kind of starting discussion background. The next session is, it jumps directly to the practice and asking or talking about the role of the architect in this process. Well, we have been discussing even in the previous sessions and also through different discourses, a lot has been said about the context, climate, the economy, the culture, and so on, all these being generators of architecture. And even when we talk about the specifically African or Ethiopian context, these factors being multiplied and so on and so on. So with this as a background or as a known fact, what should the role of the architect be in today's Ethiopia? And I will supplement this discussion also with the issue of money, which is becoming more and more strong these days because we have a poor country, whereas we have very rich people who are somehow guiding the image of the city with all these buildings and all these investments happening. So I would raise the issue of the role of the architect, and also in the second question can be an investigation of thought.
I think what would the role of the architect, I think should play his role, that's what I say. His role as a designer, as the originator of a design, a building design, he should play his complete role. While I was thinking about this discussion, I was trying to think of the role of the architect, where his role came from. We know as architects that history of architecture tells us that the architect originally was a master builder, historically, which means there was only one person who designed, who built these masterpieces of history, old history. So at the time, it was him. He was designing. It was him. He was also building. Then there came a time that instead of just building one church all his lifetime, he realized he could make a sketch, and then he could delegate the construction to another person. Then we saw in history that the architect would conceive the whole thing and make a drawing, but the construction would be done under his supervision. So that was a time where the architect was an architect, he was an engineer, he was the design complete self. So I think down the years we find the architect again living then part of his responsibilities. So he became a designer of envisioning a building, and then we see these engineers, the structural engineer, the electrical engineer, the sanitary or mechanical engineer we know has appeared. So we see on all these steps that the architect was in control of his work. He understood what's going on. He knew how to construct them. He has a good command of them. And now we know today that the architect, the structural engineer and the electrical engineer or structural engineer are not the only ones. We see that in certain projects there are other professions coming into picture. We have people who work on security, on the data, the lift professionals. So the list is growing up. But what we would find as a constant was the architect. He was there. He has always understood what was going on, and he would know what is involved there. So I think what I would like to question here, as our role here, as architects here, are we really doing that role? Are we really knowing what's going on after what we have designed? So I think at least conceptually, technically, we should be convinced that the work of a building in its totality is a profession which the architect has to be in command. We have to use the services of many engineering professionals, which we know now and which we don't know in the future. There will be more coming. But it is our role that we understand who is coming in, understand what is the role is, but not abandon it for a service with a pretext, I could call it a pretext, or for negligence, or maybe misunderstanding that this is in an area which is not of our boundary. So I think at a technical level, that is one. And then, on the practical level, of course, knowing this responsibility we have, we should make sure that we are responsible, whether the role of a client, which comes in the next line, or many excuses we are having. So that's what I want to say. I think the most, you cannot hear? Okay. The most common thing I see now, as architects here, we are not doing, is we have officially agreed, at least in the practical terms, that when it comes to construction, when it comes to supervising a building, we feel this is not an area which is of our responsibility. I think our major responsibility is to design a building and to know what we're designing and to make sure that we also understand the construction and we supervise it, not give it away to another professional and then be pushed out. I think we're getting pushed out. We know that architects are being pushed out from the profession. We are now mostly responsible to the building permit of the projects we see in Addis, not responsible to the rest of the process. So I think that's a major role I think I would like to emphasize.
When he told me that I was going to be in a debate with Zellek, I was wondering what difference we may have, because Zellek, of course, was my teacher, and later on, also when we were practicing, he used to be a very good mentor for me. So I can't find anything to negate what he said. However, just to emphasize on what he's saying, Zellek explained how the practice of architecture grew from the master builder to what we have today as what I would prefer to call the project architect, who is responsible for whatever else happens on the building, whether that's electrical, sanitary, or data, security, whatever. In the context of the Western world, and I know we have a couple of Germans in the room here, they may agree that the practice of architecture has taken time to develop, taken time from the early days, then to the Renaissance, the modern ages, the industrial age, later on the contemporary, and now what we have, call it international style. In this process, the architect has understood the burden of the different design disciplines that come up with a building, a Western architect. When we bring this analogy to our context here, it's very unfortunate to learn that the practice of building in Ethiopia has been interrupted for centuries. I think the last recognizable structure we built was during the Gondorian times, meaning the Gondor castle. Of course, before that, we had remarkable works of construction with the obelisks at Aksum, about which even today various professionals have still questions they have not answered on how it stood up, how it was fixed to the ground, how it was pulled from a nearby mountain. Then it was interrupted till the early days of Addis. in which time it was not Ethiopians who were building, but Indians, Armenians, and so on. So I think in our context, we have missed this opportunity to grow into the European architect. And what is in reality happening is the laws and regulations, most of us here who are practicing on a template that is developed in the Western world. We are not practicing on a template that's developed here. Most of us are using new metric and new first standard books when we are designing. Most of us refer to the American Institute of Architects or the Royal Institute of the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, or the EiABC, when we start to define architecture, the practice of architecture, the scope of the practice, and so on. So I may even boldly say, in the context of Ethiopia, if we want to come to a stage where a European architect is, we need to go back to the time and place, maybe, of when people like Michelangelo, Battista, and all these people who have come up with impressive textbook architecture that we even refer today, and relive that time. So in effect, what I'm saying is, today, us architects in Ethiopia cannot afford to be none but the master builder. By this, of course, it should not be taken as an arrogant opinion, but a chance for the architect to understand what is involved in the complexity of a building. Now, with this addition, I would also like to go back and agree on what Zeleka said about the specialization that is today. There is specialization, we cannot omit it. There has to be someone who has to calculate the air volume in this room. I'm sure Battista did not concern, he did not have any idea about this when he was doing the different palaces and monuments that he was building. So we have to be very much engaged in these exercises. We have to understand what it takes to calculate the air volume in the inner room. I have had a chance to work with mechanical engineers, with electrical engineers, and very often I'm very much frustrated with their level of understanding of space, of ambience, of beauty, and very often side on utility, and sometimes also too exaggerated. So for us, I would impose on an architect to take up this role of the master builder, and in time, release some of his responsibilities.
I think we should not also ignore the money factor. I will forward it again as a discussion. I would like to raise it again because it's being very, very strong. Are we poor or not? Or which way should we go as practicing architects?
Maybe I will talk a little bit from the previous topic, because this discussion reminded me something I want to share. This morning, there was a group of architects visiting the African Union new project, the Arba Minch University Architecture Department students, about 80 of them. And then one of the students asked me, he just pointed to the ceiling, and can you tell me what that material is? Then I felt, he's a student, instead of answering that thing, what the thoughts that came in my mind is there is the kind of responsibilities we have as architects. Because as architects, we are expected to know everything you see in a building, in a way. That it becomes a very difficult responsibility in a way. So it doesn't mean actually that we have to really master all these things. I think we are taught at the school or in the practice to be able to manage all this information in such a way that we end up making a building which is of a design dictated by our design ideas, not dictated by the issues of materials which we don't know, that we're dictated and imposed by others. Because what happens is if you lack this information, then you would submit into an idea which others which partially are knowledgeable in certain areas, and then we were humbled to admit and also to get imposed certain ideas. So what I just relate to this is that it's true, it is a very daunting responsibility, and it's not also an easy profession to be an architect. I remember some years ago there were young architects who were in the 30s here in Addis, and he commented that when I grow up, I would like to become an architect. So he's already 10 years in practice. So it's true, in architecture, it's like that you really need to grow up as an architect, meaning to try to collect this all information and then be able to comment. Yeah, I'm just saying that about an architect who was trying to really work what he was preached in school and who would like to become an architect. So I am defending those group of architects who really love their profession and who try to have a list influenced by money, but to try to keep the preaching they had in the school and to live up to that. There is no doubt architecture has influenced it, especially in this country. Money has influenced it, there's no doubt. Because every time we go to a bid, probably we get 1 out of the 10 or 20 bids, we may go into an architecture bid. I'm sure most of the reason is there is some group of architects who have managed to get projects. So there's no doubt money is also in the influence of architecture here. So maybe, Aman, until you speak, I will think.
Money is good. Without money, we can't come up with architecture. There are many who believe architecture ends with the drawing, unfortunately. And if it was so, then the architect would be synonymous with the painter. It would end when you finish the drawings, basically. But architecture is a product.